Evan Davis. You might know me as the presenter of Dragon's Den on BBC Two, or you might know me as the presenter of the Today programme, or one of the presenters of the Today programme on Radio 4, or you might not know me at all. Looking at you, I think you're a Radio 4 crowd, if I'm honest. Now, I am emceeing this afternoon. We have a format that is a little different from most events you'll go to. It is fun-packed. It is designed to get you involved. So we'll have a panel up here, but you can be part of the panel. There will be seats here for you to speak as well. It's going to be an interesting afternoon. You'll either love it or hate it, but even if you hate it, it is going to be useful. And through all the kind of game show formats that we have devised, in fact, it is basically a conference with a breakout session. And it's the same old thing. Our subject today is the link between economic and business success and diversity. Diversity in the workplace. Now, I am, as a gay man, interested to observe that the most powerful and successful piece of real estate in the world economically, Silicon Valley, the one that has generated more value in the last 40 years than any other similar-sized piece of the earth, is next to San Francisco, which is the most gay-friendly place on the planet. Is that a coincidence, ladies and gentlemen? I do not think so. Now, I mean, quite seriously, I don't think it's a coincidence, because if you think of someone like Steve Jobs, who is probably, I mean, you can argue about it, but probably the single biggest value creator the planet has seen in the last 50 to 100 years. He was an LSD-smoking hippie in his younger life, and then went on to do these great things. And it is interesting to speculate, would he have succeeded if he'd been born in Switzerland or in Singapore? Was the hippie-trippy, tolerant, PC climate around San Francisco the right place for Silicon Valley to be so successful? Silicon Valley has its own diversity issues, and no one's going to say that those have all been resolved, but it is certainly a place where all types and all sorts gravitate and are very productive. We will be focusing on the city this afternoon. Now, the day is partly built around the use of the iPads that you have been given. I say you have been given the iPads. You actually do have to return them at the end of the afternoon. I'm sorry about that. But I am told that if you can get out the room without being rugby tackled by someone who tries to get it from you as you leave, you win a free iPad. It isn't encouraged. If you, for any reason at all, have difficulty with the iPad, if you have a technical problem with your iPad, if you have accessibility issues with your iPad, just at any point you like in the afternoon, you don't need them for a while yet, at any point in the afternoon, just drift over to the back there, and someone will try and assist you with whatever issue you have. Now, the game is in two halves this afternoon. The first half is essentially about the problem. The second half is about solutions. The first half, about the problem, is essentially a panel discussion. The second half, after coffee, is more a call to action and is, well, it's called a hackathon, which is basically you're going to be sitting on the tables around the edges, and there you will come up with the solutions, and the output of the day is a 12-point manifesto. More on all of that as we go. But before we get into any of that, we just have a few formalities. And to kick off the formalities, I want to introduce Ken Elisa, who is a great chum of mine. He's been a guest on various programs I've presented, and has been actually not just a guest, but a star guest. And Ken started his life actually at IBM, didn't you, Ken? But he's now runs his own boutique merchant bank, as they call it, Restoration Partners, which is specialization on technology issues. And Ken is on the committee overseeing this event. He has been an inspiration for the event and is indeed the father of the event. Please welcome Ken Elisa.
Well, thank you, Evan. Thank you, Evan. Thank you very much. Next time I turn up on one of your programs, perhaps I can have such an enthusiastic introduction. And thank you for calling me the father of this event. I'm actually rather boringly the chairman of the committee that put this event together. But there are some links between being a parent, I think, and what we're seeing today. Because there is as I am a parent, I can attest there is a big difference between the moment of conception and when your child has grown up, graduated from university, and you can't connect really the two events. And I can say quite honestly that when we sat down to begin to plan today, I said, well, there are a few characteristics that I'd like to see in it. I'd like to get all of the representatives of all the affinity groups across the city together. I want to tear down the walls of thinking about how we can make things happen. And I'd like to do it by having a debate, and then I'd like to produce a manifesto. Well, people say, Ken, that sounds so unbelievably 19th century, possibly even late 18th century. Let's introduce concepts like hackathons and so on. So the fishbowl is what, as Evan has just said, what I'm now taught when I talk to my children, a debate. So it's a fishbowl, and the hackathon will produce a manifesto. But there's an important bit to this, side to this, which is as I've gone around talking to people about affinity groups in the city, what I've discovered is whichever affinity group one belongs to, if indeed one does belong to one, they tend to be self-serving in the sense of introverted, talking to each other. You have to grab time away from your day job to do things. You don't have a large budget within the organisation. And if you're allowed to get out as an affinity group, then what you get to do is to meet similar affinity groups. So it might be ethnic, it might be gender, whatever it happens to be. And so the issues are broadly the same. And to the best of our knowledge, we've never brought together in the city representatives of affinity groups across the piece, so we can find common cause and deal with the issues that we feel are standing in the way of Talent Rising, the name of today's conference. There was my friend Charlotte Sweeney, who's in the audience somewhere here. Charlotte, where are you? Charlotte? Oh, sorry. Oh, you're sitting next to me. Charlotte. I have a shorter memory than a goldfish. Sorry. Charlotte ran a really interesting, thought-provoking conference in Mansion House, which is the other great establishment entity here in the city, a few weeks back. And everyone there had handheld devices as well, slightly older tech than iPad, but a similar sort of thing. Actually, it was Android. It was just lower order technology. And we were asked to vote on various questions. And one of the questions was about the leaders of organizations in the city and whether the things that they said about talent and diversity and inclusion actually meant anything on the ground. The question was, are the things that the leaders said happening on the ground? And I think up until that point, it had been a really good conference. There had been discussions, there had been debates. It was all very polite and so on. And when the answer came up on the screen, because that's how it was done, the answer to the question is basically, is your organization walking the talk that your leaders are putting out? The answer was yes, 15%, and no, 82%, leaving 3 who weren't quite sure. I'm not quite what they weren't quite sure about. Maybe the iPad look-alike, perhaps it was a snob point. But the real issue here is that 82% of the people there who are having a really good time said no. They may say the things at the top, we believe them, but it's not happening on the ground. It's to tackle that problem that we're all gathered here today. But part of the problem isn't the people in between us, you here today, and the people at the top. I would argue, but we will debate it in not so many ways, we'll fishbowl it, that's the new verb, later on this afternoon. Part of the problem is between the ears of the members of affinity groups. And I have to tell a quick story from my Reuters experience from some years ago, now 2006. But I was asked to join the Reuters Black Employees Network as a board director, non-executive director, to come along and meet the people and be a role model. And the things that are important, talk the talk at the top. I was about to join the 15%. So I went along to meet these dozen young people, and they fell into two groups, which I would define as the victim group and the victor group. The victim group were all motivated by an argument that said, it isn't fair, we can't climb up in this company, the top levels are barred to us, and even doing our day jobs are impeded by the fact that we're black, because that was the nature of the group. And the other half said, I want to change the world, I want to set things on fire, I want to make a fundamental difference. You will gather I bonded rather better with the second group than with the first group. And afterwards, a very good friend of mine now, who's also here, Kunle, raise your hand. That's hardly raising your hand, put it up properly so everybody can see. Kunle, who then was about 22, he's much older now, but he's got married, had children, and done all those sorts of things. But Kunle was 22, and he came to see me afterwards, and he said, Ken, you were quite aggressive in your presentation and to some of the people in my group. Very proprietorial and sort of Nigerian presidential of you, but in my group. And he said, Ken, I didn't like that. What are we getting wrong? And I said, well, I don't like people sitting around feeling sorry for themselves, saying being held back is something to do with the colour of their skin in this particular case, but something about themselves that they can't change. What I like is people saying, you know what, damn it, I can't change the things I can't change. I'll change the things I can change, and I want to change things in the organisation. And Kunle said, what? Because he was that sort of age at the time. Explain again, Ken, and I explained. And he said, well, what should we do? And I said, get the Black Employee Network to do something dramatic for Reuters Business that will tell everybody in Reuters that you're a force to be reckoned with. That was a fairly easy thing. You can say this at the top. This is the 82-15 point, really. And then people go away and nothing happens. Kunle came back 6 months later with a laid-out program for a conference to be held. As it turned out, it was too big to be held in the Reuters offices, had to be held at the RSA, called Is Africa Open for Business? I chaired it. We had about 350 senior people who were interested in doing business in Africa. This is 2006 or 7. We had high commissioners, ambassadors, all kinds of people, ex-presidents, business people, hedge fund managers, all in this room debating with a panel about whether Africa was a good place to do business. And the star guest of the day was Ali Dangote, Mr. Dangote, known as Mr. Cement, the richest man in Africa, the richest man in Nigeria, who's created an enormous commercial enterprise from almost nothing, talent having risen. And Kunle and his 23-year-old compatriots got Mr. Dangote to come along to this event for the day to act as the keynote speaker and the big draw for it. I can't think of a better dramatic example of what the city stands for and what we're trying to do. Talent, absolutely. They think, well, you know what, let's be audacious. Let's see what we can do. Let's show the point that we can make a difference. And that Kunle was a great example. I'm proud to say that Kunle now has been promoted several times inside the company. He sits on the committee making today happen. He's a man with an enormous future. He's broken out of the victim mode and become victor. So one of the questions I'll be challenging you with this afternoon is what's happening between your ears as well as what's happening around you within the organisation. And hopefully if we get it right, at the end of this afternoon we will have come a long way, hopefully all the way to defining the solution, as Evan said. It will be a manifesto, and it's a manifesto that we will be presenting to the Lord Mayor, who will decide how she fits that into the remainder of her programme, and she will then hand that on to the next Lord Mayor for him to think about how he fits it into his programme for the next year. Here we are in the heart of the city establishment, and we get the chance to tear down some of the things that are barriers in the city establishment and make this a better place for all in the UK. And when I say we, that's a little bit royal of me. Actually, I mean you, because today is your afternoon. It's your chance to get your blood boiling, to get your thoughts going, and then to turn that into a manifesto, which we undertake to keep alive and to make sure happens. And to prove my point that we're not only in the heart of the establishment, which you can see, but that we've got the support of the establishment, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and our Lord Mayor, Fiona Wolf, CBE. My Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Guildhall for an afternoon of affinity and audacity. Audacity is a fantastic word. You can really get your teeth into it. Audacity. And you'll see from the red that we're really city-focused. But it's all about the energy. It's all about the power of diversity, which is the focus of what we want to achieve, which is to get the wave all the way up the beach this time. I feel I've been on the crest of it for years, and it slipped back. And I think it's really about getting some energy behind this agenda. And I have to say that if you look at the definition in the dictionary of audacity, it's boldness or daring, especially with disregard for conventional thought or other restrictions. Good word. It can mean a bit of effrontery, of shameless boldness, temerity, sheer brass neck. But for us today, it means being brave enough to see something new, a fresh perspective, championing those with novel and interesting things to say. And it means great ideas and risks better managed. And I know we have the insurance sector in the room, so that's a language they speak powerfully. And it means more resilient solutions, that enable us to do more with less. That is what I'm calling the new normal. And capturing that innovation and inventiveness is something in which I think we excel. London is a city of cities. It's a city for cities. As the mayor of Istanbul said to me earlier this year, London has a responsibility to other cities. And there's so much going on and so much that's exciting as we map out a more responsible, a more inclusive capitalism, which takes its rightful place in serving and not ruling society and the wider economy, of financing investment, creating jobs and growth, and taking care of people and planet, and benefiting society as a whole. And this is a capitalism committed to, and not just including, but also making the most of our human capital, and not just financial capital. And it's the heart of my mayoralty, and especially how we are not just diverse, but actually how we capture the benefits of difference. Now, we've made huge progress, but it goes without saying that we still have some way to go. And you can't argue with the facts. You know, women on the FTSE 100 boards recently topped 20% for the first time. That was regarded as a huge achievement. But around them, 25% are non-executives. But if you look at the number of female in executive roles, the top executive roles, well, only 7.2%, which you would not expect in the 21st century. Because it's actually 100 years ago when women really entered the workforce in significant numbers, the start of the First World War. It's one of the reasons why TfL are running the year of the buses, because actually they wound up with actually more of us on the buses that year. So now is the moment to push the wave the whole way up the beach and capture those benefits of diversity. And of course it's you, the leaders and the keepers of the talent pipeline, who will lead the way. Because you all know the value of diversity, you get it, you champion the cause in the workplace and across organizations, and that's what we're wanting to achieve. It's across organizations, creating networks of networks, so that you know that you're not alone or just talking to yourselves. And we know the vast majority of senior leaders are actually signed up to the idea, and they're on the crest of a wave, but we know that they need help, because actually diversity is everybody's responsibility. And my sense is that quite a lot of us in the middle of the organizations, I include myself in that as well, are just actually terribly busy doing the work, trying to think out where the next job's going to come from, and quite like to go home at night. And so for this, it's just something that falls to the bottom of the pile. But it is not an optional extra. It's a business necessity, and we need diversity of thinking for the new ideas. We've got lots of challenges, and behind every challenge is an opportunity. And we have to stay competitive. So, today I think presents us with a fantastic opportunity to map out how we can help that talent to rise. And by convening an affinity group of affinity groups, if we can call it that, a group of groups that can collaborate creatively to write the manifesto that Ken mentioned, so that we can hold up high a symbol of the city's commitment to not just diversity, equality, and inclusion, but audacity. So thank you all for coming, and for what you will achieve. You will achieve it this afternoon. And thank you particularly to Evan, our compere, to Ken, Tricia Scotland, Rachel Stewart, Antonia Belcher, Claire Harvey, and Alpesh Patel, whom you'll see in a moment. And thank you to our audacious partners, the sponsors EY, National Equality Standard, Thomson Reuters, Instinctive, Crystal Interactive, and Women in Wine. Yeah, you thought that was me. I've been eating and drinking for the whole of the UK all year. And thank you to Ken and the committee for their hard work in putting this afternoon together. Ken has challenged me to nail our manifesto to the door of the Mansion House, making me sound like Martin Luther heralding the Reformation by nailing his 95 theses to the door of Wittenberg Church. He was audacious. I don't know if I can exactly promise that, because English Heritage would probably have kittens if I did it, but I can promise that I will be nailing your manifesto to lots of human masts, and also sticking with it. I mean, you may think, Ken, that I come to the end in November. That's not going to happen. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona. Right. Are you sitting comfortably? Yes, good. How many of you, I'm going to just do a little show of hands here. The world basically divides into people who are optimistic, who see the glass as half full, and people who are pessimistic and think the glass is half empty. How many of you would describe yourself as by nature optimistic? And how many of you would describe yourself as on the more pessimistic, glass half empty side? Wow. We lack diversity in this forum. All right. What we're going to do for the next 55 minutes or thereabouts is have what is called a fishbowl session. This is the fishbowl. And it's going to operate like this. It is essentially a discussion of whether there's a problem, why there is a problem. We're not going to discuss so much what you would do about the problem. We'll discuss whether it is much of a problem, whether it matters that it's a problem, and then we'll tie up some loose ends. So a sort of 55 minutes to discuss whether there's a problem, why there's a problem, does it matter if there's a problem, and some other issues. We're going to have a panel of 6. I'll ask them to come up in a minute. They're going to take most of the seats up on the stage here. But there are 2 empty seats, okay? And this is where you come in. You can be a panelist for a minute, or maybe even a little more, or a little less. So all I want you to do is not put your hand up or anything like that. I just want you, if you would like to speak, to come and sit on the empty chair. And when you sit on one of the empty chairs, well, then you will get to speak next and to make a point, or to ask a question, okay? Or to tell a story, or to tell a joke. I mean, whatever you want to do. So you're going to be the speakers. Now, the rule is that there has to be an empty chair at all times. So when one of you comes and sits in an empty chair, the one who's occupying the other chair has to get up and go back to their seat. But if the one who's occupying the other chair hasn't actually finished their point, I'll stop anyone sitting on the other chair. So if you start, you can finish, more or less. But essentially, I want you to come and sit on the empty chair and make a point. So we'll have the discussion that involves you. We'll be putting points to the panel. They'll be, if you like, they're the permanent members of the panel. You're enabled to become temporary members of the panel. We'll have that discussion. And at the end of our 55 minutes or so, we'll send you back to we'll keep the chairs empty, and we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes of more conventional question and answer to the panel. So, but for now, it's a panel discussion, and I want you to come to the panel. Let me bring the panel up. Panel, would you like to come and take your seats now? The 6 of you. Have we got Baroness Scotland? Is not here yet. Okay. Oh, she is here. Brilliant. We've got a full house. Come and take your seats all, leaving the 2 seats with the microphones empty. Yeah, get a room, you two, if you're actually in the middle of a panel discussion. Thank you. Yes. Now, let me just reiterate some sort of rules. Basically, you're going to take one of the empty seats. One seat must remain empty at all times, but you can stand hovering, waiting to sit down in an empty seat while the other person finishes. If I tap you on the shoulder, please get up and go back home. Go back to your seat in the audience. stick to the topics as we go through. I'm going to be kind of announcing, have we got one chair too many?
We have a wheelchair.
For you.
We have a spare
No, but I
chair.
don't need a chair. I don't need a chair. I think that this is not one of the empty chairs. That's one of the... we get
Oh, it's all gone wrong.
We're going to get an awful muddle. We're going to get them together. I don't need a chair. No, that's it. This is where I stand. And the idea is that we basically have a rather positive discussion on the more sort of welcoming ideas rather than shouting people down. Let me introduce the panel. I'm going to start with Antonia Belcher, founding partner of MHBC, which is it's a construction consultancy, basically. It's called a new breed of multi-skilled building consultancy. But basically, Antonia started her career as a surveyor. Claire, next to me here, Claire Harvey, is Assistant Director of the Youth Sport Trust, a charity. Claire actually began her career as a psychologist, forensic psychologist, and a prison governor. Claire had an accident in 2008, had to revisit her sporting career, her sporting and career direction, became head of corporate responsibility at the Financial Services Authority, as it then was, and went on to captain the sitting volleyball team at the Paralympics in 2012. Ken, you heard from him earlier, so I don't need to dwell on Ken. Alpesh Patel is a former barrister, founding principal of Trifinium Partners. It's a global private equity house, providing intelligent access to a variety of worldwide growth opportunities in emerging markets. We'll be the judge of whether it's intelligent, Alpesh, but it provides access to a variety of growth opportunities. Alpesh has written his own column in the Financial Times for years and is the author of 18 books. You write a book before breakfast.
Start young.
18 books on investing.
I'm 75.
And sits on the board of City Hindus. And Baroness Scotland. We're calling you Patricia, is that all right?
Fine.
Baroness, yeah.
I'll take it.
Baroness Scotland is the former Shadow Attorney General of England and Wales.
No, former Attorney General.
Yeah, but it says former Shadow Attorney.
Cross
but
out shadow.
Also, following her time, you didn't let me finish,
No, we're
following her
panicked.
time as Attorney General from 2007 to 2010.
He's smooth, isn't he?
And
What a
after
recovery.
she returned to private legal practice, but did serve actually as Minister for State for Law Reform and Criminal Justice as the sort of Deputy Home Secretary in the 2000s. At the age of 35, which is really barely a few days ago, she became the youngest person for 200 years and the first black woman ever to be appointed a QC. And the one who I've not spoken about is Rachel, who's director at YSC, which is a global firm of business psychologists. And so what the company does, what Rachel does, is support FTSE companies, FTSE 250 clients, to build their individual and organizational capability. And Rachel's been leading the development of the company's view of female leaders and gender diversity. Rachel had previously had HR roles in NatWest Group and Coos. Right, now we begin. What I'd like you to do is I'm going to put the question, remember, we're basically in 4 segments, okay? Is there a diversity problem? Why is there a diversity problem? Does it matter? And then we'll go into the sort of getting buy-in. For the first segment, is there a diversity problem? We're going to run for, 10, 15 minutes. I'm going to ask the panel to answer the question, is there a problem? While they are speaking, one of you has to come up and sit in one of these 2 empty chairs. Okay? If you don't, it doesn't really work. So come and sit in one of the chairs, somebody, but there always has to be an empty chair. So as soon as one's filled, you have to wait for that one to, you have to wait, you have to come up when the person finishes their point. Okay, but is there a diversity problem? Claire, you worked at the FSA. You had a job in this area. Is there a diversity problem? What is the problem?
So I think there are 2 diversity problems. One is obviously the sector, the city is not as diverse as it should be, as is representative of the wider community. But I think the second, probably biggest issue is that the way that the city and the way that the sector looks at diversity is the wrong way. I think we are looking to fill gaps, to tick boxes, to say that we've got the right people in the right jobs, and that we should all be about talent and leadership rather than any individual, whatever they look like, whatever their sexual preference, whatever they are as an individual, can thrive rather than numbers and figures. And I think until we start to change how we look at it, and we look at it as a culture rather than an outcome, we aren't going to get very far.
It's very hard not to look at it, though, by looking at statistics about how many women do we have and how many black people do we have and do we have any gays. I mean, you can see how, if people like you say worry about diversity, the answer is to start counting.
Yeah, and I think that counting is a really useful tool to tell us how we are along the journey, but that isn't the outcome. Once we've got a percentage of X, Y, and Z, that isn't the outcome we should be looking for.
Right. Rachel.
So, I look around the room here. Fantastic. I'm not just looking at the amazing architecture, I look at the people in the room and I think, wow, this is a pretty diverse group of people. But as a psychologist, I know that the problem we have with diversity is in our heads. So we all sit down and, just look at who you're sitting next to. You've probably completely unconsciously chosen to sit next to someone who in some way makes you feel quite safe and comfortable. And this, for me, is the big problem with diversity. It's a psychological problem. People like to work with people who are like them. It makes them feel comfortable. And that is, a constant pressure that I think affinity groups, like all of the representative members in this room, are struggling with. And it's not going to go away, so I'm delighted to hear the Lord Mayor say, watch this space in November, because, this is a constant journey that we're struggling with, to get people to recognise the value of working with people who are completely different from them and bring a very different, and for me it's not about your ethnicity or your gender or any of those things, it's about your thought diversity. So what I'm always looking for as a psychologist is somebody who's going to bring something different to the party in terms of their ideas, their way of looking at the world, their way of responding to events, their way of strategizing and thinking ahead. And that, for me, is the biggest blocker in any organisational setting, social setting, you name it. I think it's particularly bad in the city.
Right, but if we genuinely prefer to, as you say, sit next to and work with someone who is like us, is it necessarily a problem if we don't? I mean, if that's the way the cookie crumbles, maybe that's the way the cookie crumbles. I mean,
all of the social psychology research shows it's an absolute benefit to work with people who are not like us. Right. Now, there is a downside in that the management of the dynamic is more difficult. You have to think about, not saying something that might offend Claire in a wheelchair. I have to think about that. Whereas if I'm working with people who are able-bodied, I don't have to think about that. But actually, the results, the solutions, the outcomes. So we have a good fair win today with this brilliantly diverse crowd, is that you get much better solutions when you've got very different people with different ideas coming together to create a solution.
Right. Okay, so we've got a couple of points there. Patricia, Scotland, do you think there's a problem in this corner of the world?
Absolutely. And I've been waiting for years for it to change. And when I first came to the bar, I was told that the pecking order was white male, black male, white female, and guess who's the bottom of the pile? And that my chances of long-term development within my profession were somewhere -0. And at that stage, there was only 7.33% of the profession who were female, and about 0.1% of them were black female. So it didn't look too good. I hoped that, 30 plus years later, that the pecking order might have changed, and it hasn't. We've got more people in the profession, but when we look at the achievement, when we look at how many judges and senior people in the profession we haven't. Can it change? Yes. Has it changed in as much as we're there? Yes. But have we got lots more to do? Absolutely.
Some will say it's not that necessarily, I'm just trying to tease out the argument, okay, that it's not a race thing, or a gender thing, it's a bigger reflection of society. So if you look at, the grades that young black people were getting in school 30 years ago, when the lawyers of your generation were being made, you wouldn't have expected many of them to become QCs because they were hugely disproportionately represented among the lower performing groups in schools 30 years ago. So they would say what you really have is a social problem, and the pipeline going in isn't going to be fed. So it's not, if you like, a reflection of the legal profession or the city. It's a reflection of the material they've got to work with. Now, should any weight be given to that?
Well, I think not very much for this reason. All the professions that I can think of showed a similar variation in complexion. So it wasn't about law, or about being, if you looked at doctors or architects or musicians or people in the media, it was a very similar waterfront. I think what's happened now, which is, I find even more worrying, is if you have people entering our profession where you have to basically have a 2-1 anyway, you're fishing in a very select, gifted pool. And so the disparity of performance should not be significantly different because you've got all these people who are obtaining at the same level. And the greatest number of firsts coming out of universities now are women. So if you have women of a higher caliber going in with greater skills, and then somehow a metamorphosis takes place of these very talented women, so that you only have about 1% of them at the top, and 99% of those who achieve are male, something tells me statistically you might have a bit of a problem in terms of equality.
We're still waiting for someone to come and sit in those chairs. I'm not going to jump at you straight away, but we've got some. I'm not going to ask you to speak straight away, but come and join the panel.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Antonia, I want to get your view. I think in general, people would think transgender issues are, I mean, you think about gay issues have come an enormous way. LGB issues have come a very long way. That the T journey is, what, 20 or 30 years behind where the L, G, and possibly the B journey is. But tell me how you see the problem in your profession and in this area.
It was interesting because I was trying to think, I mean, there is a problem and there is obviously a need for attention to it and solutions to be evolved. But I think the problem is at different levels, different stratas, depending on where you work, what society you move in, who your friends are, all that sort of thing. So I think it's different for different people because, interestingly, I'm one of the lucky ones. I haven't had a big problem, and neither a big problem at home nor a big problem at work. But I think, and I think the city and big business is trying to work very hard to make the environment easier for transgendered people. But there's a long way to go, obviously. For me, I think the big issue is for the people who work in the smaller businesses where they don't have that concentration from the big businesses. Big businesses see the CSR benefits, they want to be good employers, and they've obviously got the finances to offer support. But the small businesses, they're as much a part of the city. They support most of the big businesses that work in the city. And of course, they're a very different animal for anyone who is transgendered or let's put it this way, think they could be transgendered. For me, I entered a very male-dominated industry business. I joined a very Dickensian practice where all the partners except me were members of the clubs in St James's. And obviously, I thought I would be told to go as soon as I told them that I was going to change. And it was a big eye-opener to find that actually they had no problem with it and they allowed me to
When was that?
transition. That was 14 years ago.
14 years ago.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's a problem. I think people will see it as a problem, but I think they need to analyse the environment they're in. I think they analyse how they fit into things and decide what parts of it could be a problem for them, rather than treating it as a problem.
Just out of interest, how many of you here think that if someone in your workplace went to the bosses and said, I'm going to transition, how many of you think it would be a problem for them in your workplace? How many of you think it wouldn't be a problem for them in your workplace? Well, back to our optimists versus pessimists, I suppose. I want to know. That's very interesting. How many of you work for big companies? Yeah, it's a vast bulk of.
Can we ask a slightly different question?
Okay.
Can we ask if that person was someone of value, whether that would be an issue, as opposed to whether that person was an administrator in a big company, whether that would be a difference?
Okay, so if you think the person was administrator is someone not of value, we're taking it from
I mean, someone of... Yes, that's my inference.
Yeah. So how many of you think it would be a problem for someone who the bosses thought was dispensable? So we're not talking about a star employee who's got... But someone who might be a run-of-the-mill employee who would be quite dispensable. How many of you think it would be a problem in your company for that person to come forward and say... Yeah, so not really very many of you. Not very many of you. Right. I'm going to come to you in a moment, but you're doing very well. And so far, so good. But I did want just to hear from every member of the panel. We've heard from Ken already, but I want to hear from Alpesh. Alpesh, problem or not? Just let's get your sort of introductory line.
Let me put it slightly differently. I think the problem is an attitude problem. Sometimes it's the attitude of the people that I'm applying for promotion or for the job, and sometimes it's my problem with attitude. And by that I mean this. I had about, I think, 48 rejections from various chambers. When you say black women are at the bottom of the rung, at least you made QC. I couldn't even get tenancy. And then there were a further 48 rejections from corporate finance houses, investment banks, and all the rest of it. So I'm actually astounded that I'm allowed in the city at all, because nobody else seemed to want me at a time. So you change what you define as success, and you say, you know what, I'll start my own company. I'll fill it up with brown men, just to piss off the white men. That last bit was a joke, just in case. But you redefine what was success. For me, success no longer became trying to be like the barristers that I aspired to. And let's assume for a moment, and it's a big stretch of the imagination, that I was good enough to have been accepted by any of those various chambers. So sometimes it can be my attitude that can change, and actually, you know, it's a bit of a cliche, one door closes and a sort of window opens. It is that slight cliche, but yes, a greater opportunity comes along. We often, I think, in the city, just look too narrowly. I mean, the city is the home of not just Audacity, it's the home of innovation. You're going to innovate when you're put in a corner, when you have to think of solutions. The greatest firms have been built by people not just joining a big institution and saying, oh, let me see how I can make it bigger. The greatest firms have been built by people who had nowhere else to go, and I think that's the talent that we find in the city. So I look at it as a celebration when we're rejected and we don't get ahead. And I never analysed whether it was because of the colour of my skin or because I was heterosexual or whatever else. That's one thing. Of course, there will be at points problems with the attitude of the other people on the other side. It was just too difficult to judge whether it was because of race or just because maybe they just wanted people who looked like them, dressed like them, and all the rest of it. And if they did, it's just as well they didn't have me there because I wasn't willing to dress in stripy grey trousers. Sorry, you look like you wanted to say something.
Well, just to say that I got rejected too, and as a result we started
I'm not buying it. Attorney General.
We started a new set of chambers.
Okay.
Because established chambers wouldn't have me. So we started a new set of chambers, and 3 people got rejected from my chambers when we were doing pupillage. One was Geoffrey Voss, one was Andrew Hockhauser, one was me, and the person they took on was the only person of the 4 of us who did not take silk. Andrew Hockhauser is now a very successful silk doing employment law. Geoffrey Voss is now Lord Justice Voss, and I became the Attorney General. The rejects of the bunch. So just to say to those of you who don't want diversity, and Andrew and Geoffrey are Jewish and I'm black, and I'm sure that had nothing to do whatsoever with our rejection. However, we went on to make a significant contribution. So one of the things I think to say to companies is you reject talent at your own risk.
Right. So we have, if you like, the straight argument, you know, the absolute bang-on argument for diversity from Patricia Scotland. And then we've got points that it shouldn't just be about box ticking. from Claire, and you're trying to overcome a sort of an innate human nature, which is just to try and mix with the folks that you get to know. Tell us who you are and.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Hay, and I'm a manager at KPMG. And I guess the reason I wanted to come up here was because, for me, there are lots of different people that you can ask this question to. Is there a diversity problem? I think everybody in this room is here because we strongly believe that diversity is essential. I think I look at the graduates that are joining my firm at the moment. I would say it's more than 50% women. Then I look at the board and the number of partners we've got, and I think, as you said, Baroness Scotland, the number at the top is small, and it's not just my company; it's most companies. Are the partners, are the board bought into the idea of diversity? Absolutely. We've got a fabulous team. We've got a brilliant new head of diversity and inclusion. Are they making a difference? Absolutely. The people at the junior levels, they don't really think there's an issue because they look around and say, oh, well, there's more than 50% of women and have we got ethnic minorities there? Absolutely. Have we got these networks? Yes. But for me, the problem is in the middle. So how is it filtering down? So at a manager level, it hasn't necessarily become an issue yet. I look at the senior managers and the directors around me who've been in the firm for a long time. They don't think it's essential. It's not part of their goals. And for me, it's how can we filter this message that we create today? How can we filter that down into the middle levels and actually force the issue?
So the bottom and the top are on board, but there's a sort of middle management layer which provide a blockage to those at the bottom getting to the top.
And who set that example as well? I don't see my first and second year graduates having breakfast with a board member every other week. They probably don't even meet these people. So the people they look up to are their managers, their senior managers and their directors. And those are the people that we really need to put some pressure on from my perspective.
Thank you very much. Stay there until someone comes and sits here, and then run back. Ken, I want you to take that, because in a way that's just reiterating the point you made, which is the mismatch between the bosses saying, all got to sort this out, folks, come on, go and do it, and then everyone below saying, nothing's happening.
Well, I think one of the problems we've got to tackle today is we've got to make it in the interest of that middle group. Let's take your analysis, actually not at face value, I saw lots of people nodding when you were saying it, so let's take your analysis as a fact. The challenge then is how do we make it in the interest of those people in the middle to change? Patricia's story was really about people at the top. We're talking about a different problem now. And so if everybody at the top in the city is saying, no, I believe this, I mean it, I'm prepared to be measured, the ticking boxes, that bit's dealt with. We're all here today, so the bottom, we'll stick with your analysis of everybody today, but the bottom is okay. But we know why it matters to us, because we are the talent, we want to be recognised, we want to contribute, we want to achieve. We know why the people at the top are saying it, because they either believe in diversity or they don't want to be embarrassed by not being seen to believe in it. So our challenge today is how do we make it really in the interest of the people in the middle? And of course, the problem with that is we are going to shrink their number by making the change. And I was on the board of a has to be remain nameless professional body. Actually, that really rather defines it, which I hadn't said that, of a body. It was professional, though, I can't be rude about it. And I had introduced unconscious bias awareness training for the various committee heads and trustees of the organisation, because we had the same problem there that we're talking about today. And a man said to me on the trustee board, but I don't like what you're proposing. And the reason I don't like what you're proposing, Ken, is because once we were only talking about women, he said, once we've dealt with gender, he said, the next thing we'll have to do with, I suppose, ethnic minorities, and then we'll be dealing with disabled. And he said, then there won't be any room for people like me. And I said, calm down, Adrian. Now I've given it all away. Calm down, Adrian. I said, if we ever get to that halcyon moment, there'll be a quota for people like you. But my point is, he only saw threat and not opportunity. So I think one of the difficult challenges for us, but we have to try to solve it today, is how do we make it not in a negative way, in the interest of that middle management rank, for them to get better talent. I hope I'll be the witness here. I think part of it is the business will be more successful, it will make more money, it will do better things, there'll be more bonuses. So it ought to be a no-brainer. Rejecting talent is a bad idea, but somehow that doesn't work, because we've said that enough. So we need to find a deeper way of motivating that middle group, not to vote for Christmas, as Turkeys jokingly do, but to see it's not a zero-sum game.
Really waiting for someone else to come and take this other chair here. Oh, go ahead. Are you ready to go? Yeah, brilliant. As soon as you sit down, Other chair has to be vacated. Brilliant. Thank you. Can we just clap the person? So what was your name again? What was your name? Jennifer. Jennifer. Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Gosh, very loud mic. So I'm a lawyer. I work at Slaughter and May. Very junior lawyer. I've only been qualified for a year. And I'm the president of their BME Cred network. So we rebranded it from BME to BME Cred, which stands for Celebrating Racial and Ethnic Diversity. One of the things I'm really interested in is, we talked about psychology, unconscious bias, and I suppose one of the things I think about a lot is, on that subject, is perception, our own perception, my own perception, my own barriers. So one of the things I worry about is, am I looking for it? So I'm an Indian girl, and I don't often think about it, but trying to be a corporate lawyer in the city was something I thought, gosh, this is traditionally white male and Oxbridge. I'm Indian, I'm female, I'm not Oxbridge, am I going to get in? And I wonder if that's sometimes my perception, my barriers that can haunt me, and I've got to overcome that, and I'm very interested in your opinion on that.
I think that's a very good question, because if you view your whole life through a frame of I'm gay, black, Asian, you will be interpreting everything that happens to you through that pair of glasses. And everybody has rejections in life, and you'll be viewing whether the rejection was anything to do with your race, ethnicity, religion, or whatever. You're viewing it through those glasses. I think it's a very good question. It comes back to what Ken was saying about trying to avoid the victim mentality too much. Rachel, can you, with your psychologist hat on, offer any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of very, very long-standing, well-established research about this, about when one aspect of our identity becomes salient, as psychologists like to say, you know, when we are more aware of that aspect of our identity. So, you know, I'm going to use a rather crass or slightly silly example. You know, I don't dye my hair. I sit in lots of meetings with very senior female executives who are supremely beautifully groomed, you know, and I'm very conscious that they must be looking at me thinking, gosh, you know, what's wrong with her? Does she never look in the mirror? You know, and I think that aspect of my identity, the grooming aspect, comes to the fore when I'm sitting in that forum. And so I absolutely understand why, you know, when you're thinking about your employment context as being filled with people who don't look like you in one aspect, and you know, you're talking about ethnicity and gender and you know, university background, there's three aspects. It feels very salient, you're very aware of it. And actually the psychology of that is that if you allow that to dominate your thinking, your performance is likely to drop. When you're sitting in a room where you feel very comfortable because most people look like you and your identity is closely aligned in your head, may or may not be an experience, but in your head you feel very similar to them, your performance is enhanced, you relax into performing. So it is a problem if you allow it to become a problem in terms of, you know, that's your salient identity. If, for example, you know, the way you introduced yourself was I'm a young, newly qualified lawyer, then, you know, that's a different aspect of your identity. It's about your professional qualification and what you've chosen to do as your role, and you'll be sitting in a room with other lawyers who are on different stages of their qualifying journey. You're much more likely to perform better if that's the identity you hold in your head.
Can I just say, you're at Slaughter and May, you're well-spoken, you've got an immensely brilliant future ahead of you, you're overthinking it.
That's very kind.
That's it.
It's very interesting. I think Dan Ariely, in his book Predictably Irrational, talks about a test where they got a group of Asian women into a room. They did this a few times. And the first few times, they got them to believe that they were there because they were Asian, stereotype good at maths. And they gave them a maths quiz. And then the next few times, different people, they got them to think they were there because they were women, not so quantitative. And they gave them the same maths test. And when the Asian women thought they were there because they were Asian, they got systematically better maths scores than when they were there thinking they were there as women, which is a very interesting playing to the... And so that is a very interesting dimension of the problem. Thank you very much.
Can I add one thing?
Go, Claire and then Patricia.
For me, I think you're absolutely right. But for me, there's also something about the culture of an organisation that means you get those little subliminal messages every day that mean you're valued or you're not. I know, when I applied for a job in the FSA, you just have to look at my bank account to see what I don't know about the financial sector. And, I rocked up an openly gay woman in a wheelchair for head of corporate responsibility. They must have thought Christmas had come early, And actually, I lived with that for quite a long time. But then, as I've gone through my sporting career, I realised that when the culture of an organisation makes you feel valued and the things that are important to you are embedded into the culture and you're not constantly having to ask for them, really simple things that to everyone else would make no difference, like, organisation around Ramadan, things for me like wheelchair access. So I'm not always the one having to say, can you tell me where I have to go? Those little messages, those little cultural cues are a bit like acid rain, I think. They either make you feel valued, in which case you begin to forget that you're different, or they gradually eat away at you and remind you every day that you're not. And I think sometimes that's the stuff that goes on, if that makes sense.
Do you feel that, Antonio?
Well, I just wanted to say that obviously self-belief is probably the one thing you need, whoever you are and wherever you are. For me, obviously, one day I was a bloke operating meetings and trying to deal with all the people I knew, and I stayed in that same business, and the next day I was a woman. And so, the whole stereotype issue, I just had to sort of swing it 180 degrees in order to work the next day, because I didn't go away and disappear. I literally just turned up the next day as a woman, and for that I just felt I just had to have self-belief. I just had to believe in myself.
Did they feel they were treading on eggshells for the first 6 months, do you think, or did they?
I had told my business partners that I would do it a year ahead, and I had said, because we had a break clause in our lease and we were going to move offices, and I said I'd spent a year getting them used to the idea, but none of the staff knew, so I just turned up that first day, and it was a surprise for the staff. I think they all went off to the pub and had a snigger, which was fine, and that's how they dealt with it. But it was business as usual.
Yeah, very interesting.
It's very interesting you chose to connect it with the lease change. That's very property.
Yes, it is.
I'm quite impressed.
The logic was that we were going somewhere new, so I felt it was easier for me to be new and for everyone to accept me being new.
I'd like to take your point now. Yeah.
So, my name is Teresa Farron, I work for Aon, and I'm the chair of the LGBT network. I just want to speak to the question you said about perhaps how we can break into that permafrost that is middle management. And for me, I think what might be crucial is the changing kind of understanding of the impact of diversity in thinking. In the early days, it was about doing the right thing, making people feel better, perform better, but we can't really measure that terrifically well. And it's a HR problem, right? And then it's kind of moved up into the talent war, which is still, the senior leadership starting to get it now, but it's still a HR problem. HR, go get me a better slate of people to come and join our organisation. And I think now we're just starting to see some research coming through that are actually demonstrating that people are failing to innovate if they don't include diverse thinking. And that, for me, I think could hit the middle managers' kind of bottom line for them, because they're the ones with the targets they've got to meet. And it's for them, it's all about how do I meet my targets, how do I exceed my targets, and less about how do I be nice to other people. So
link it to business performance.
I think, the more that we can do in that space and drive out some good stats that just scream attention, then I think that could actually hit that middle layer.
We've had a lot on whether there's a problem, and I think the general consensus is there is a problem. And we've heard various dimensions of the problem. We've heard the straight people just not wanting to take folk who are different, and thus casting aside talent. That's the most obvious manifestation of it. We've heard the potential problem that we perform down to the stereotype others might have of us, which is a kind of internalized problem. We've heard the problem of subliminal messages being sent to us that make us behave down to the stereotype. And we've heard some of the difficulties of overcoming that problem, the rigidity of a middle management layer who don't see enough in it for them to switch out, and the dangers of doing this in a box-ticking way because you then start focusing on symptoms of the problem rather than real underlying causes. And you're also slightly up against human nature. This was Rachel's original point, that people have a kind of desire to be among those who they feel most comfortable with. And these are all ways in which I think make it very difficult. I do want to just, if we can, spend a few minutes on, I suppose it's really embellishing the point that Rachel started us on why there would be this problem. I mean, when you talk to people around the City of London, they don't say they're racist. They don't say they're homophobic. Is there something going on that is in the recruitment processes, in the promotion processes? Is there something going on? I mean, what is it? Is it subliminal biases? I just want to spend a few minutes on why there might be this problem. And we've heard that human nature is just sort of one of the things we're up against. But let's embroider that a little bit. Are you speaking to that point?
Yes, that's okay.
Go ahead, Fred. Go ahead.
I was kind of like, that's what I want to speak
Just
about.
make whatever dance point you want, and I'll try and fit it in.
Hi, I'm Libby Denchfield. I'm from Standard Chartered Bank. So I think the bit that kind of like I've been sitting there thinking, okay, when do I say this? When do I say this? When is appropriate? I think one of the barriers, I've seen a lot of progression on diversity and inclusion throughout the industry, particularly at Standard Chartered. I see a couple of things that are coming through that are working against that in the recruitment practices recently. One is LinkedIn, because we see our talent acquisition team basically being told to cut costs. And so they are like, oh, well, let's just go out to your network. And that network is exactly, go and find somebody who looks after yourself. Or who's that bloke you got on with on the trading floor who works really well? Okay, well, let's go and get him, because we know he does a good job and he's a good bloke. So that's really, really working against it. And then I think, likewise, what you see, unfortunately, is sometimes there are some very boutique diversity and inclusion recruitment providers out there, but they charge more for their services than the standard ones do. So I think what I'd really like to say is, okay, so every time we cut costs when we're hiring people because we've used LinkedIn and we've not used a recruitment provider, and every time we've chosen a recruitment provider who has not got their diversity slate appropriate, you know, what actually is that cost to the organisation? I think it's very, very short-sighted, and I think that it is something that we probably need to address. That's my thing.
And you're making it's a general point, actually, which is in business areas of which the city is totally an example, where networking is a big part of the way the business operates. And it is here. That's why you all cram into a small piece of the city or Canary Wharf. It's because networking, informal and formal, is very much part of the job. If you're not in the network, it's hard to get into the network. It's the same catch-22 as youngsters who want a job that needs experience. Well, they haven't got experience, and they can't get experience because they can't get a job because the job needs experience. And I might say on the Today programme, where we've been under enormous pressure to raise the quota of, not the quota, to raise the number, the diversity of our guests, and in particular, female voices have been hugely underrepresented. It doesn't take a lot of analysis to see why that is. It's that the best way to be a guest on the Today programme is to have been a guest on the Today programme before, because those are the ones that are tried and tested and are in the contact book and we know how to get them. And that obviously means anything that you do is entrenched. And so if you're not diverse, it's hard to become diverse. Any panel want to comment on that? It's a very good, though, analysis of a sort of, you've got a causative start, which is Rachel's point, and then, bam, it's into, you have to vacate the chair now. I'm so sorry, it's just the rule. It's just the rule.
Great point, though.
Yeah, it's a really, really important point.
Well, I just say the point that's being made there is that the old boys network, which we used to rail against, has gone online, which is a really good point about LinkedIn that I hadn't thought about before. And there are lots of old boys networks. There's the Oxbridge one, there's the Oxford one versus the Cambridge one, there's that blah, blah. And so we all belong to affinity groups, to old boy networks, which is not the same as affinity group. And there's a point about we are comfortable with people like ourselves. And I think that's okay for a club. It's when that spills over into business performance. And so I think the lady who came up before is onto something here. If we can somehow separate what we're comfortable with knocking the lights out in the business, we might be able to find an answer to the big question.
And I think we've now got enough information which can make an economic case for diversity, that it's hard-edged. If we look at where development is coming, it's Asia and Africa. And more people want people who look like them. And guess what? The people who look like them aren't white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males. And if you look at who's buying goods, women now buy 89% of everything that families buy. So if you want to sell goods, you better sell things that women want to buy on behalf of their family. The one thing I wanted to say from earlier, because I think it's really important for us to say to people, you need to be positive, you need to be energetic, and you need to be out there. But just because you are neurotic doesn't mean people are not trying to get you. Because we did a report, Interlaw did a report on diversity to ask the question, are the perceptions that black and minority, ethnic and women have about the way they're treated in the law just a perception, or is it reality? And the report basically said, sorry guys, it's the reality. So it's not the perception that you have that you are being treated unfairly. You are being treated unfairly. You are being discriminated against. And when we looked at the level of attainment of women and the level of attainment of black and Asian people, it was less than it should have been. And the disparity between how much people were earning was very clear.
And that's controlling for all the other social background and all of those things.
Exactly.
Controlling
and
for
read
poverty.
the report,
right.
because it was one of the things that upset me more than anything else, that after all the years of work and trying, we had made insufficient movement. And that's why I think we need to be very hard-edged now in terms of what we do about it, to make the paradigm that we've been sitting in for so long, not the paradigm that our children are going to sit in. Okay. So Ken's right. Nail it on the door.
Quick one, Alpesh, and then we'll...
I think part of the problem is, okay, we're in the city, it's a place full of leaders, but we need to find the leaders who are willing to challenge and change this, and then promote those and show the other firms, look, it's being done by the best. That's the best case for return on investment. What I find embarrassing at the moment is we're trying to do a huge trade deal with India, and we've got the Chancellor and we've got the Foreign Secretary there. Two middle-aged white men, it just so happens they've got those posts, and I'm sure they're very good at it. Where are the British Indian ministers? We have them in the British Parliament. You would have thought, if your point's correct, that you want to hang around, when you're selling something, you want to show the other guy, we've got people like you, but no, you go with the ones who look the least like the ones you're selling to and hope to get these billion-dollar deals and so on. We need the leadership from the top who still don't get it. They might be in politics, they might be in banking or investment. When we find those leaders, we cultivate those leaders, then hopefully we'll be able to show the middle management and the others as well. But it's that top layer of leadership of which there is still so much lacking. So much of it is still lacking. How can we barely expect the poor guy who's working, or girl who's working 18 hours a day in middle management, say, okay, look, I've got another thing for you to do on top of everything else you're doing. They just want to get home and be with their kids. Get the ones right at the top who you find are already willing to work with you on this and promote them everywhere to say, that's the best practice.
Sir, you're our guest panellist.
David Pearson at KPMG.
Did you expect a cheer or
From at least one person. I am excited by the idea of this being an opportunity rather than a problem, because I think that steers you away from the victim part of things. But as a trained management consultant, I'm willing to put aside my experience that tells me that data can be very helpful in defining whether there actually is a problem or not, because of this perception issue that, you know, we're trapped inside our way of seeing the world. And I think one of the great ways to smash that perception down is with data. But I'm willing to accept that other people don't see it that way, so I'll just put that to one side, and I'll think about how this problem might be becoming entrenched and how it shows up in certain layers of organisations and among certain people. And I wonder whether one of the issues is that people have different ways of learning and sort of negotiating the world. One of them is very data-driven. So perhaps there are people who like numbers, they want to see the figures, they want to see how many pound signs are attached, how many people are in your network, how many people are affected. So we can feed them that stuff. Of course, there are other people who either don't get turned on by that or don't pay much attention, even though they say they do. And I wonder whether one of the ways of breaking through that part is around stories and people sharing their stories. And the reason I thought of this is because I observed last year in a forum that was brought people from all around the world, leaders, chief executives, chairmen, and so on of different organisations. And a couple of them made the point that, well, as chief executive, I know that inclusion and diversity is important. Of course it is. I'm fine with the gay thing, for example, one guy said. This is a chief exec. I'm fine with the gay thing. What he later discovered was that actually he had employees who, in this organisation that was, fine with the gay thing, were encountering in their daily work life barriers, issues, unconscious bias, all of these kinds of things. And it was only when he was made aware of the stories of these people that his viewpoint changed. So I think perhaps there's an opportunity for us. I don't want to get into the solution bit.
Well, I think
ahead.
Stories are good.
But I think one of the problems around why this thing is so persistent is because people have different learning styles, and we need to use the whole range of teaching, if you like,
so
and be teachers.
You need spreadsheets and you need
the
anecdotes.
lot. I think you need the lot, and you need to keep doing it, and you can't just do it once and forget it. It's an ongoing experience.
You said you don't like us getting stuck in a victim mentality. So the question, I suppose, for you is how do you not just make those stories, stories of victimhood and oh, it wasn't fair because he got the job and I didn't get it because I'm gay or I'm black or whatever. I mean, the stories may well end up just being rather victim-like stories, no?
Excellent question. How would you do it?
Yeah, right, okay. Very good, very good. That's the spirit.
Well, role models have a role to play in this, don't they? A really important one. I think one of the key things I've observed over the years is there's a tendency to deny. So that there's the opposite of the, I didn't get that job because I'm black, gay, female, whatever it happens to be, or although I am black, gay, female, I got this job, and it's because of my talent and not because of anything else about me, so I'm not going to talk about the fact that I was gay, black, whatever. And actually, you have to carry both, because everyone else is looking at you, and they're looking at that set of labels. And I'm a relatively recent convert to the responsibility as a role model to spend time going out and saying, well, here's my story, here's what I did, for people to go, oh, well, if you can do it, I guess I can easily do it, and I'll move on. But I've often heard people criticize others by saying, well, you've kind of turned your back on, quote, whatever that group was that you were once a part of.
But the other thing you get is, oh, well, you had it easy because you had this background or that lucky break or... Yeah, but you're right.
Yes.
The stories can be the very positive stories rather than just the negative ones.
I think for business, it's the stories that what you lost out on. So, for instance, my chambers, understanding that they lost a Lord Justice of Appeal, an Attorney General, and someone else. Trust me, they didn't forget it. So it's telling the good stories of the way in which that talent fed somebody else's success. And that's what you missed out on. I would also count for middle management, I would make diversity one of the issues that they have to deliver on. Because if you have a diverse, a challenging set of things you want to achieve, you're not going to be able to achieve them without diversity. So why don't you make it one of the things that they have to deliver on as well?
It's also telling the good stories, because particularly in the transgender community, there's a lot of horrid circumstances, horrid stories, and you very rarely hear of the good. You very rarely hear of people, and obviously a lot of transgendered people, when they do transition, they go into what we call stealth, so they actually successfully become who they want to be, and they don't want anyone to know what they were before. So, and if they're very successful, then you'd never know they were ever transgendered, and they won't talk about their past. So identifying people who can talk about their past, who can talk about their journey, can say the good, the bad, to guide, to steer. Because there are, sometimes the transgender person will rush at it, and obviously rushing at it can be a bad thing, because you've got to take people with you. So being able to give that experience and to be able to talk about it openly and without people being concerned about what they're hearing or being concerned that other people are hearing it, I think is a very good thing. But there is no forum for that. You very rarely see that.
I think the other thing is also not just the stories historically, but actually getting your staff to tell you what would make things better now. I'm going to write a policy on X, because by nature of middle management, who are normally the policy makers, they're survivors of the system, so they don't necessarily think about the issue. So actually getting your affinity groups and saying, I'm going to write a policy about annual leave, what would really make it better for you? And actually giving them the voice to input what will make things better rather than just what's wrong.
Can I just pick up on the KPMG change managers point, which is around what motivates us to change? And as a psychologist, spend a lot of time working with large organisations trying to push through massive cultural change. And what they tend to do is focus on the logical analytical case for change. And there's lots of amazing research out there around how more diverse leadership teams provide better corporate governance, better corporate performance. So the business case is sort of established at a macro level. What to go back to your point about middle managers feeling threatened, what's this going to do for me? It's going to reduce opportunities for the white middle-aged men. That's not a good thing, is it, if I'm a white middle-aged man? I think, what you need is to connect people to something that feels really quite visceral for them around change. And all change involves some winners, some losers. We know this, So what you have to do is help people understand how they can be part of the winning group through this sort of social change. And usually people connect with it when they either meet somebody who's been unfairly, treated, or they meet somebody that they feel is incredibly talented and somehow has fallen out of their system and therefore isn't bringing value back into their immediate environment. So if you can create that personal connection for people, you're much, much more likely to get change to happen, even with the really well-established logical, rational, analytical case there. So I think the more personal points of connection, be it through a victim story or a victor story, actually, either way, is going to work. And my last point is around threat. And as a psychologist, we all know that, we have two reasons why we might do something. One is because we're trying to avoid an unpleasant outcome, and the other is because we are motivated to get a very positive outcome. And I think a lot of the story about diversity is still couched in the avoidance of unpleasant outcomes mode. There's a lot more to be done in couching it in here's all the positive things that you can get.
How does that work with a bigot, rather than somebody who's open-minded, liberal, but hasn't really thought about the issues? Because a lot of people end up working in middle management for bigots who haven't thought about something but have a sort of ingrained behaviour. How do we crack, from a psychological perspective, how do we crack them?
I'm going to be extremely politically incorrect, so I
think you're in safe company.
Nobody's ever going to repeat. I mean, I watched a version of Have I Got News for You where they had Godfrey Bloom, and he was being taken to task for his historical sexism. There was a terrible photograph of him with his face in between a lady's breasts, bare breasts. And this was, he passed this off as something that had happened 20 years ago, and she was quite happy at the time, and she didn't mind. And it was Victoria Coren was just taking him apart sort of psychologically for this sort of implicit and explicit sexism. And I think when you have somebody in that space who isn't really aware of the implications of their attitudes, their mindset, and what is and isn't acceptable, it's very difficult to unpick that for them without triggering all of their threat responses. And actually, humour can be a good way if you can tap into that person's sense of humour. And in a way, that was sort of half working for Godfrey Bloom on this programme, not particularly well. But another way you can do it is, you have to help them see it through their eyes. So if you can explain, if you can get them to talk about a time where they've been on the outside, they've been treated as the lesser mortal. They've been the person with all the subtle cues that have been telling them they're not quite hitting the right buttons. And on this programme, of course, that's exactly what was happening to him, because he suddenly was the minority with his slightly antiquated views about women. That's when people really connect with the issue.
We only have about, we're overrunning already. We overran before we got started. So we have about, I'm going to give it about another 5 or possibly 10 minutes. You know what, we have a little way of telling whether you're finding the discussion interesting or useful. And I just want to take this horrible risk of actually asking you to rate, not rate the panel, you're not rating the panel, to just rate the discussion. If you go to your iPads, you should see a little fishbowl icon. And you can just, you've got the three, a thumb up, a sort of thumb sideways and a thumb down. And if you push one of those three and then hit now, we actually get live feedback here, which is actually horrible. Horrible. I'm totally against this, but it will come up on the screen. So why don't you do that? Just hit the fishbowl icon and then push one of these things. I've left it a bit late in the session, really.
We do have your names and addresses before you press those buttons.
And we will see how many of you have put thumbs up, thumbs down. I mean, I think personally, I would of course push the thumbs up if it was me. I'm not in any way trying to influence you, but I think we've actually had the fact that certain things keep recurring is quite useful. Oh, what was the
terrible? Yeah. Well, hopefully that was wrong.
There's panic over in the corner.
66
I think. I don't believe those figures. Okay, no, they're just recalculating, ladies and gentlemen. And but no, my point.
This is a Nigerian election all over again.
66. Oh, we got it right. Brilliant.
Fix.
Is the right answer. Very good. Right. No, look. What I wanted to say was, I think the fact that the same things are coming up again and again about the sort of psychology of it and what you're up against, the middle management blockage to progress, and these are all things that you'll take with you, I hope, into the second half of the afternoon. The subliminal cues that make people behave to the stereotypes, the fact that these come up again and again are very, very interesting. And the embedding of problems, that once you've got a problem, it's self-reinforcing because people just see the social norms around behaving the way that they have always behaved. Let us get another contribution or two, and then we have a little bit of time for questions and answers to the panel. But yes, go ahead. Tell us.
Hi, I just wanted to ask the panel what they think why there is so much prejudice against hiring ex-offenders. I mean, I think threat, bigots, fear of the unknown, middle management, HR, but it's the last bastion of discrimination that people can discriminate against ex-offenders. In no way could they discriminate against somebody in a wheelchair or the colour of your skin or your sexuality.
And do you work with ex-offenders, or do you?
Yes, I run a recruitment consultancy for women ex-offenders.
And you find it difficult? You obviously see them.
Yes, the prejudice and the discrimination is disgraceful, frankly.
Does anyone on the panel want to tackle that one?
Well, I'm an ex-prison governor,
Yes.
so I guess
Okay, go on. Yeah, Claire, of course.
A view, and I think you're absolutely right. I guess I would put ex-offenders probably with gypsies in terms of the last group that you can probably comfortably criticise. But I find it fascinating because in the prison service, and the Baroness will, I'm sure, agree, there's definitely a moral judgment about the good people and the bad people. And what I learned from my time in the prison service was that there, but for the grace of God, is any single one of us making any single decision. And I find sometimes I think it's the same for all diversity issues, but it definitely comes out in offenders and in disability. What you see is the issues and the potential issues and the fear and the risks rather than the potential. In the same way, if you think about disability training, what you do is you put someone in a wheelchair or you blindfold someone and then you spend the whole day thinking how hard it is. When you spend every day in a wheelchair, it's not hard because you do it every day. Rather than the positives around, if you want somebody who will look at data day in, day out with minute detail and never get bored, then you need to employ an autistic person and see the positives of that thing. And it's similarly with ex-offenders. The vast majority of ex-offenders I've met could sell sand to camels, could talk their way out of any situation, can charm anybody they like, have an amazing entrepreneurial skill. But it's that judgment call. But I think it goes beyond ex-offenders. It's also, I think you were saying earlier, it's that thing about you have to have a 2-1 degree. You have to have a degree to do this. And I think what we really need to do, tearing down those walls, is actually really stop to think about what are the skills we want people to have, not where do we want them to have come from and to have got those things, and how do we evidence those things before we'll get there.
Yeah, but come on. We have to, the recruitment process has to use some shortcuts. Otherwise, it's just too expensive, isn't it? And you're going to say a 2-1 is a proxy for all sorts of skills and categories. Now, of course, it's not fair to people who don't have a 2-1, but you're going to make life very difficult for people if you start saying you can't use any rule of thumb. to recruit, aren't you,
I'm
Claire?
not saying you can't use any rule of thumb. I guess I'm questioning whether they're the right ones we should be using given today's landscape.
Right.
And I want to come on the ex-prisoner point, if I could, before this gentleman comes in, because I think we've got two sides now, this middle management challenge, and there may be many more sides. One is a fear of the unknown and the not being sure what's going to happen to me and voting for Christmas. The other one is a fear. And so for odd people that you don't understand and don't like, gay people, whatever they happen to be, that's a funny sort of fear, because they're not a physical threat, they're not a reputational threat. There's another fear, which if I let somebody in who's been in prison and I know they've been in prison, then they may do something all over again. And that's a different kind of fear. And I'm chairman of a homeless charity, and we employ about 30% of our staff, or 300 staff, so 30% are ex-homeless people. And of those 30%, many have been in prison. So we've crossed that Rubicon. But I can remember when we hired our first ex-homeless person, and managers in our homeless charity said, well, if we're going to have ex-homeless people working, we better have two lots of toilets, one for them and one for the staff. No, they're going to be staff. Well, they're not. And then, of course, now that's long forgotten. But there's an enormous barrier to overcome. So I think the answer is back to telling stories. If ex-prisoners told their stories and were honest about it and open about it, people go, oh, it is there, but for the grace of God, I know somebody and I connect. If you try and disguise it, to hide it, as you were saying earlier, then actually we've added nothing to the sum of human knowledge and the lowering of that fear and ignorance barrier.
Let's get a last floor contribution. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Okay, I'm not going to tell you who I am or what my background is because you'll probably judge me. But as a white woman...
It's the blue socks were judging me.
I haven't sensed an issue in the city with gay people. I haven't sensed an issue in the city with bisexual or lesbian. I haven't had the opportunity to see whether there's really an issue with transgender. But what I have seen a real issue with is the promotion of women in the city. And I think one of the key reasons for that is not because the city is made up of a preponderance of sexist men. I think that there are real structural issues with the way the city works, with the way the workplace works, as to how we can retain women in the workplace to the level of seniority where they are going to be promoted to a very senior level. And the reality is that more women than men become pregnant. There is a reality that more women than men become the carers of children. And so one of the key reasons why we are unsuccessful in retaining women is because the workplace isn't making sufficient provision for flexible working and the like, but also because, and that's not because of a lack of will to do that. I think there are real issues with trying to create flexible working in certain service sectors. Clients are often very unwilling to accept those sorts of arrangements, and so these are the sorts of things that we've got to grapple with to try and make that problem much less of a problem.
Can I just
Thank you very much. Yeah, and
I've got a big issue with
Rachel, go ahead.
I've got this is where I really get my soapbox out metaphorically and stand on it and start shouting through a loud hailer. I've just done a big piece of, well, not just me, a whole team of us have just done a big piece of work on behalf of the 30% Club, and Liz has seen some of the outputs of it. I'm sure some of the other have at KPMG were a co-partner in producing it. One of the big issues, one of the big myths that this research nailed, and we worked with about 700,000 employees in the FTSE 100, was that it wasn't retention that was the issue in stopping women get to the top. It was lack of promotion. So in the 1 and 2 layers below executive committee level, women were 4 times less likely to get promoted than a man and 2 times less likely to leave. So they're sitting there in this, fairly senior positions waiting to make the move up. It's not, I mean, there are people who leave, they go off, they have children, they don't come back. I'm not saying there's not an exodus at, you know, various points in their journeys, their life journeys. But the big problem that a lot of financial services sector organisations and other organisations in the city are not aware of, because of this myth that it's attrition that's the problem, is its lack of promotion. There are great women in all of the organisations represented in this room who are not being promoted as readily as a man who sits right next to them.
Thank you. We're going to give those of you who want to ask a question, you can only ask questions now, a chance to do so via your iPads. Now, what you need to do is tap into the fishbowl icon, and you will, I think, see, I haven't got it in front of me, but I'm hoping there will be a place where you can type a question. You don't have to, but we've got about 5 or 10 minutes where we'll just put questions to the panel. And this is just a chance for you, those of you who didn't want to come up, to ask a question, and for the panel to have the floor to themselves and not have anyone else sitting here. So your time is now up on taking the chair. But I think we've actually had quite a useful discussion, because I think we have come across some, if you like, very head-on arguments and some slightly more subtle arguments around what the problems are, the symptoms are, and what some of the underlying causes are. Are you all comfortable with your iPads and asking questions on your iPads? Okay, so I now get my iPad. Oh, brilliant. Sorry, what, the fishbowl one here at the bottom? Oh, it's all there. Those are my questions. Okay, so we've got, oh, blimey, we've got loads of them. Okay, I'm going to pick one here. This feels like a nice, safe discussion among like-minded people. How can we think more disruptively and engage those who don't believe equality is an issue? I think you should take that, Patricia. You're a bit more angry about it than Ken.
Well, I think I am. I'm a bit fed up with it, because I've been doing it for so long, and I think we need really clear benchmarks. I think we need to set standards, and I think we need to make the economic case really well, and I think we need to understand the bigot. We need to understand where they live. And one of the things which is quite difficult for us to accept is some of the things we've been talking about already. It's how threatened they feel. And I think we've got to just accept that people who have the advantage at the moment know they have the advantage. And what happens is they think, if we do it on merit, I won't win. I won't win. And if I like it unfair at the moment because it's advantageous to me, and not to be of how many people in this room know incompetent senior women. And I think we will have real equality when there are so many incompetent women in periods of, and positions of power as we have incompetent men. Then we will have equality. Because at the moment, women and minorities, we have to be better than.
Yeah,
and we can't afford to be as good as. So you only get promoted if you are better.
You didn't answer the question, though, Patricia, which was, what do we do to become... I've now lost the question because there are so many here. What do we do with them? Well, should we become a bit more... How do we become more disruptive was the question, I think, wasn't it?
I think, actually, I am somebody who believes in data. I'm a lawyer, so I believe in evidence. And I believe that we have to challenge them with the evidence and then make... I would like to make the Equality Act enforceable, not just in relation to public sector. I would want to make all business have to be compliant with the equality.
On the employment side.
Yeah.
But so it's a quote. Is it a kind of quota system? Because you're going to measure a transgressing employer by saying you don't employ enough black people.
No, I think what you do is you can make a needs-based analysis of what that business needs. You need an audit of what they currently have, so you have a baseline. You do a gap analysis to identify what they do not currently have, and then you set an agenda, which is a reasonable agenda for change. And if they don't change, I think there should be some quite interesting penalties. I don't mean in terms of sanctions, but one of the penalties will be that their businesses won't thrive. And I'd like to have a list and a pecking order, because people like competition and they don't like being at the bottom of the pecking order. So make them just in the way you do your normal reporting for a business, make them report on themselves.
One of our sponsors is the National Equality Standard, and Arun Batra, put your hand up, Arun, here, so we can see you, is there. A former special advisor to Patricia, but that's another point. And Nez is trying to do precisely that in a perhaps too soft a way in the UK. So for those of you who want to get angry about this, getting your organisation to endorse Nez will be a good first step, because that will normalise the measures of the points that we're talking about, the 9 defined categories and so on. So if we're going to give some oomph to the Patricia point, Nez could be a way into that.
Yeah. These questions are really great. I wish we'd had some of these a bit earlier, actually. Okay. This is one. I think, Antonia, you should try and answer this one. Should I leave a big company that doesn't value diversity, or should I try and change it?
That's a great question.
I think it's just a really good question.
Should I try and leave it or try and change it?
Yeah.
I think the transgendered person's response to that would be that you're in a better place in a larger company, because generally all the help and assistance is coming from the larger companies. The smaller companies are not going to really be able to help that much, particularly on the cost side. And I think the thing with the transgendered person is it is a very expensive task to change, as I'm sure people will appreciate. And if the National Health Service is woefully underprovided on this side, there's a long waiting list. Yeah. So obviously, if you've got funds to pay for it yourself, then you can get on with it. But and the bigger companies are waking up to the benefits of these people and supporting their change. The smaller companies, I think, are going to struggle with it because it's a big cost. It's also the time scale that it can take a long time to be off work. In terms of changing the company, if the company doesn't have the processes or the will to try and provide, I would say yes. It's a great platform to try and make the company. No, I would
try and change it.
There's a lot of leading companies out there now which are leading from the front. They're doing lots of things. But I think the interesting thing here is data is important for the transgender community, because I don't really know the facts, but for 14 years I've worked in the construction industry, and I've never met another male to female transgendered person. I've never met them socially, and I've recently joined something called Freehold, which has been set up by the surveyors with the lawyers to promote LGBT issues, and I've gone along to many evenings, and I've yet to bump into another transgendered person, male to female, and I think it's not a lonely place for me, but it would be nice to meet people. It would
be nice if there was
it would be lovely to meet people who have done it within my own industry and to compare stories and all the rest.
Well, you're the same as the rest of us. You like mixing with people who are similar to you to some extent, and
you might.
Sometimes I'm quite happy to be where I am and
okay.
As I am.
I'm going to. Evan, can I just add to that for a second? If you need to ask the question, and it's a common question, I'm sure, about change or leave, then you've already got the answer. You're not up for the fight. You're not the crusader type. Find out the kind of personality you are and go with that. You don't have to change the world all upon yourself. Somebody else, hopefully, will come along and do it. The lady who was the lawyer, just touching back to that point, you don't just represent yourself, and some of you may just want to represent yourselves, whether you're gay or Indian or whatever ethnic minority, and sometimes you don't want to. You just want to be selfish, and you want to say, you know what, I'm going to have a quiet life, I'm going to not take on the fights and the challenges. But for those of you who are up for it, who are up for the challenge, and recognize that you're not just going to become a partner at that law firm for yourself, you're going to become it for the next 100 Indian girls, or just for everybody else who didn't have it from Oxbridge or whatever else group it is. Position yourself as that crusader. That's your personal story. That'll get you through it. And the greatest thing is you'll actually get a purpose in life far, far better than being a lawyer.
Right. So it depends on who you are and your taste. Look, there are a few questions here that I think get at an issue that perhaps we haven't talked about enough, which is we are talking about very, very recognized diversity categories of LGBT, ethnic minority, gender. I mean, these are all very obvious categories. Now, in terms of the business case for diversity, This is not built around these categories that you study. They might be built around optimist versus pessimist, numeric versus non-numeric. They may be built around introvert and extrovert, or alpha and beta. I mean, and these personality types may not correlate with the categories that we talk about and the categories that we've sort of, made sure we filled on the stage in front of us. And Rachel, just tell us a bit more. I mean, the diversity that is useful in business purposes, is it having, the right number of black people and white people and straight people and gay people, or is it the diversity of having different types of mindset feeding into a problem?
Well, it's absolutely the latter, but unfortunately, when you look at lots of large corporates across the globe, actually, what you find is that those mindsets are not as diverse as you would expect, given that they're global companies operating in global markets and trying to sell to a global audience. And the issues around, I described it as thought diversity, having the traditional categories of underrepresented demographic groups, let's call it that, so it's probably not the right way of describing what I'm trying to say, is that you do have a slightly different life experience and a different way of bringing that life experience into a corporate decision-making environment. But absolutely, as a corporate psychologist, I spend all my time categorizing people's decision-making styles, their emotional intelligence, their personality types. Actually, what you end up with, though, it's just as easy to end up with homogenous mindsets by using those sorts of categories as it is demographic categories. And one of the most heartening things I think I've discovered in the last sort of year of doing this research, the 30% Club, was that one of the things that came out of the research was those senior women leaders, and there are a few of them now. I know that the Lord Mayor talked about over 20%. It's actually 22 point something percent. What the most heartening piece of research, the finding was that those women were not being seen to be of a type. They were all seen to be very much sort of individuals and very different, which made me think, actually, it's not the gender thing that they're bringing. They're not, they're not doing gender. They're not showing up as women. They're showing up as individuals. Yeah. And they're bringing their individual experiences to that boardroom and to that corporate governance decision-making forum. And that's where you get, when you've got that individual diversity, you get the mindset diversity, the thought diversity.
You're more likely to get it if you...
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, very quick point. This is for you, Ken. A number of people saying, one person saying, should class be an issue that we're talking about? And another saying, is Oxbridge an issue that we should be talking about, and sort of Oxbridge networks as recruitment? Very quick comment, and then we have to go and have coffee.
Well, class is a fact of life in every society, and so yes, it's an issue. And moving from one class to another is difficult in every society for the reasons Patricia was saying, which is if you're privileged, you want to keep everybody else out. Oxbridge is a much more difficult one. I'm a Cambridge man, just to be clear. Oxbridge is a much more difficult one because there are all kinds of people who go to Oxford and Cambridge because it's meant to be an intellectual elite as opposed to a class point. People used to pay to get there. Now it's much harder to pay to get there, and so there's a talent point. But if you rank all universities, and you put obviously Oxbridge towards the top and others towards the bottom, and then say the 2-1 is a normalizer, people have already lost the point of understanding the difference of capability. But I'll throw in one bit just to get everybody's blood boiling perhaps before we break, which is there's one sort of unspoken problem in the city, which I've bumped up against many times in my years in the livery movement and so on, which is the Freemasons. And it's worth just mentioning, if you're a Freemason, you are by definition a male. Women can't join it, so it's a misogynist organisation by definition. And the higher up you rise in the city civic, you are almost required, not absolutely, because Fiona by definition is an exception, required to be a Mason. So we've got secret layers inside organisations as well as the explicit. And so I put Oxbridge and class to one side and say, I think we should be more worried about the secret structures that impede progress in the city.
Wow, that was a little bombshell to end it.
There's some very controversial research from an economist, and I can't remember her name sadly, but she wrote a fantastic book called The XX Factor. And she makes the case very cogently that actually class is a bigger divider than gender. And actually, upper-class women who are successful, in terms of corporate roles, have more in common with their male counterparts than they do with women in the administrator roles in those organisations. So I think class is a really interesting factor that we do need to consider.
Okay, look, well done. We've had a sort of a canter through some of the questions and things that you can now later on discuss in small groups. We've got, I think, an agreement that there's something of a problem, that there's an opportunity cost of wasted talent. There's lack of mindset diversity, which causes, groups to produce less good results than they would if they were more diverse. And we've talked about a lot of the barriers, particularly this middle management thing, embedding of networks thing. And we've talked about we've hinted a little bit at solutions around telling stories, particularly positive stories. You now get 20 minutes for coffee. You have to race back to the crypt where you came in for your tea or your coffee. But you also have to, with your iPad, go into the agenda icon to look at where you're going to come back to when you come back from coffee. So you're going to come back to one of these tables, and if you click the agenda icon, it should tell you the stream and the table that you have been assigned to. So do that, run downstairs, slurp a cup of tea, and then get back up here by 4:10 if you can do so. Thank you. Oh, forgot one thing. We should say thank you to our very wonderful panel. Go and get your coffee.